This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. So if you're a beginner or an expert or anyone in between, you've found your new home. Welcome to Identity at the Center. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that is Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Not so bad. Yourself?
Doing great. Sat on a webinar this morning from Gartner, and it was really, really good. So the topic was the one-page strategy, and it kind of went over what the one-page strategy is and what it isn't. The idea is to capture the essence. The main point of the strategy is not meant to replace the strategy, right? So, in our experience, we've kind of done this in terms of we've built, the full identity and access management strategy for our clients, and it could be 100 slides. And then we create the executive presentation, which is maybe 10 slides, right? So it really captures the essence. But this is like pushing yourself even further. How can you turn it into one slide? And really the benefit, I thought it was like kind of genius, is like if you boil this strategy down into one slide, it really becomes a conversation kickstarter with any stakeholder population, which is really what the executive presentation is meant to be, which is kind of a roadshow deck that you can adapt. So if you're talking to HR or you're talking to marketing or you're talking to another business unit or part of IT, that's meant to kickstart. But still, getting through 10, 12 slides with somebody is not the easiest thing to do. But if you can just throw one slide up, throw it on the screen or have a printout, it's a really effective communication tool. What do you think?
Yeah. Not even comment there. You're totally right. I was wondering where that you sent me a OneDrive link or whatever, OneNote link to check something. I was like, all right, well, I wonder where this came from. And now I know you were sitting on a webinar while I was working, Jim, on calls.
Well, no, I mean I'm glad you said that because
please.
I was working too. Yeah. I think a big part of what everybody should be doing with some part of their week is sharpening the saw. I mean,
how are you getting better?
This wasn't my first exposure to the one-page strategy or that concept, but if you're not refreshing your thoughts and kind of not only reinforcing what you know, maybe challenging what you know, however you want to look at it, like you've got to be doing something to get yourself better, or you're not only going to just like stagnate, you're actually going to get worse.
You get left behind. So anyway, I thought this was a really effective tool that I'm going to try to not only, do for big identity strategy projects for clients, but also make an effective tool for other efforts I'm working on. It's really like, can I summarize this piece of work, this strategy into one slide to make it kind of an effective communication tool? See, now you're talking my language, because I think this is absolutely a skill that everyone should have, is being able to distill, whatever their message is down to a brief, concise summary, story, something like that. I think there's this natural reaction to jam a whole bunch of information as much as you can into, one slide or one conversation or, one email, whatever it may be, and it becomes overwhelming. And I think this is a skill that I think a lot of people, it doesn't come naturally. It just certainly doesn't come naturally for me. Trying to, make the topic conversational and relatable to whoever you're talking to. And if you can do that, you're going to go a lot further quicker, because you're going to be able to get buy-in from other folks that are out there. There's a time to have a technical conversation, and there is absolutely time to not have a technical conversation. And you need to be able to flip between both, with ease, and make sure that you can communicate effectively.
That's right. Yeah. And, I was kind of thinking in terms of kind of a one-page strategy. Like if you were going to make a one-page strategy for IGA, you might have things in there like onboarding and offboarding people, right? It's an important part, and it makes it interests folks from HR for sure. Then you've got like the access recertification bit. You've got role-based access control. So each of those kind of speaks to different audiences. And I think pulling all that together, you now have the conversation with like the CIO. So they understand, okay, here's all the stakeholders that are going to be interested, that get benefit from this investment that you're going to make. But I mean, what I found is like the more senior people get, or in terms of like their level within the organization, the better you have to do to kind of like make sure your message right gets to the point quickly, because they don't have time to waste. And if you're going to like try to run them through 30 slides before getting to the point, like you're going to lose them.
I think there's a difference between data and a report and a message and a story. And it's something you and I have done for years, is like, what's the story as we're going through conversations, especially when we're, talking with key stakeholders, executives, those sort of things. Is, I think it's one thing to have the data. The other one is, what is the message? And they're two different things. And, I think pro tip for all the folks who are out there trying to communicate with, people to get funding, agreement, buy-in, whatever it may be, is make sure you understand the difference and that you're communicating the right message at the right time to the right people.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to this one pager, it's not meant to replace the detail, because you might be sitting out there like, what kind of strategy is only one page, right? The idea isn't that it replaces having a detailed strategy. It's just
I got a simple one-page IAM strategy for you. Should we do IAM? One page, yes. All right, next. Right, done.
Okay, yeah. Then you got to start peeling back the onion, but for sure.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned Gartner, because I think that's a good segue. I think by the time folks are listening to this, we'll be about a week out or so from the Gartner IAM Summit that you and I are both going to be at. So we'll be there on stage, grilling Becky and Henrique on a variety of IAM topics. Getting a lot of great questions from listeners, starting to see some trends and themes. So starting to incorporate that into sort of our plan of attack, if you will, for our conversation with those two. But I'm starting to get excited. It's starting to become a little more real. It'll be cool to have, familiar faces, hopefully, in the audience. A little nervous. I think it's the first time we can kind of doing this on such a big stage, but I'm sure we'll crank out a good conversation. What do you think?
Well, I think it's really interesting that we're up there kind of doing like simulating a podcast episode, right? And you use the term, we're going to be grilling, and then we need a plan of attack.
Yeah. Hopefully those words. So that was the message. I used the words, right, were very specifically chosen for how I wanted to get that. And I think you're picking up on it.
Okay. Well, I mean, typically the Identity at the Center podcast does not meet the press, right? I mean, it's not softball questions. I think we really get into good topics, but I think we do it in a way that makes people feel comfortable listening and being guests on the show. So, but I think what's really interesting is, Henrique, who's, the person who had this grand vision of doing this session, really wants us to go in there and not have it be, bubblegum and lollipop.
Yeah. I mean, fair, but I'm specifically trying to come up with stuff and source things that are not things that you would normally hear a Gartner analyst talk about, or that they haven't answered like 7,000 times before. So something a little more unique, maybe more personal, right? Things like that. I think we've got a good list right now. It's starting to, crystallize a little bit. So, we'll see how it goes. But the problem that we have, Jim, is we have way too much to talk about, and we only have 30 minutes. And realistically,
Right.
We probably have like 25 minutes, right? If you kind of think about closings, openings, and, kind of all the kind of filler stuff in between. So trying to, cram as much as we would love to do into 25 minutes is going to be a challenge. My idea is like, we'll have a little timer on the screen for like the slides. Is like, all right, we're only going to spend like 30 seconds on this topic. So like, go, right? Lightning rounds, things like that, to try and get as many questions as we can, out, and still have it be a viable discussion. Will be a challenge, but I think we're up for it.
I don't think we should lose the one idea. I mean, I don't think we should do it, but your one idea, I think, merits discussion, which was the hot wings, like doing something where it's like we get progressively hotter and hotter food that people eat, but
said
that
this
makes
wasn't
it
Meet the
very
Press.
unpredictable.
I think that adds a level of complexity to it. I would do it. I'm not a spicy, food person. I think I would probably tap out at like maybe medium hot sauce. I think I would be the first to go in that first voted off the island for the spicy food stuff. But I don't know what we'll be able to put together on that. But I think that idea was like, hey, let's bring the hot ones kind of idea to the conversation. Like, I don't think we could have like full on wings, but maybe it's, you do a dab of hot sauce in something, or maybe eat something really sour, or, you take a drink. I don't think we'll be able to do shots or anything like that. But that was kind of like one of the ideas that we were playing around with. I don't know.
Yeah. But speaking of having fun with it, so I know that this episode is just going live right before the conference, but if you haven't heard yet, we're doing an Identity at the Center community meetup. So if you're a listener of the podcast, reach out to Jeff or I. Hopefully there's still some open slots. I mean, registration was somewhat limited. We're renting a place, which is called Corky's Gaming Bistro. And we'd love to get more people in, but I'm afraid that by the time this episode publishes, this message will already be void. But anyway, if you're going to be at the Gartner conference, at least reach out to Jeff and I. We'd love to shake your hand and thank you for listening to the podcast.
Absolutely. And we've gotten some nice messages. I think, we've had our recent new intro that people are starting to hear now for the first few times as we've gone through this. And there was a question that I got into my LinkedIn from Michael. And he and I met, I think it was last year, maybe it was a year before, at Authenticate conference. And I'm going off memory, so sorry, Michael, if I got the details wrong. But he was asking, because if you remember, we had this whole conversation on what's the difference between digital identity and identity and access management. It's like episode 151, I think. And we were having a lot of different discussions around that. We've been having the same discussion with like Eve and Sarah, recently on some recent podcasts. And he asked a really deep question. It's like, in our intro, it talks about, if it's anything to do with IAM, this is the place. And he was wondering why we chose IAM versus digital identity in that context. And I was like, well, that's a very deep question, first of all. And it's not a very deep answer. It was more along the lines of, well, identity has a lot of other connotations and meanings and things like that. So that was kind of out. Digital identity to me still felt like it was, I don't know, not necessarily like the industry term. So rather than try to confuse people, it was like, most people know IAM, whether or not they're using it in the right context or how we mean it, it's kind of a separate thing. It was like, okay, well, IAM is still like the go-to acronym for everything that you and I talk about. So we kind of left it at that. Of course, if things change, that's the power of, opinions and things like that. We can always change it down the road. But I thought it was
it's a great question, though. Like, I mean, if you think about if you think about some of the guests that we've had on the show, folks like Sarah Clark and what she's working on at MasterCard, I don't think of that as IAM. So Michael's probably right. If where he was going with it is like, your show's really more about digital identity, he's probably right. And it's also interesting that, we didn't think of this question sooner, like on our own, right?
Yeah.
Like we listened to that clip. I mean, for me, that's the first time I've actually thought of that question. I'm like, yeah, we listened to that clip of the new intro over and over again, and that didn't cross my mind once. Sad but true.
Well, we call it identity at the center. We talk about identity and access management, digital identity. I mean, I think we're taking, I've taken a little bit of artistic license with it, right? Rather than calling it like IAM at the center or digital identity at the center, we just settled on identity at the center. And then we bring it around with like, what are we talking about? Identity, access, things like that. So I don't know. Maybe we'll change in the future. Who knows? But I just spent money on it. I'm going to get some usage out of it.
Yeah, we're gonna keep the same clip, but it was still a good question.
Yeah. Okay. So why don't we go ahead and get into our topic for today, because we've got a really exciting actually conversation, because this is something that we've touched on a couple of times, I think maybe in the past, or maybe even just once. I think, Jim, your idea for this was to talk about sort of the open source world when it comes to identity and access management. And we have joining us today for the first time on the show, Igor Farinic. He's the co-founder at Evolveum, and want to welcome him to the show. So
welcome to the show, Igor.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we get too far along here, why don't we learn a little bit more sort of about your identity origin story? Can you tell us, how did you get into the identity space? You're a co-founder at Evolveum. I want to give you a chance to, I'm going to ask you about Evolveum in a second, but how did you get into identity? Is it something that you chose or did it choose you?
Yeah, actually, it chose me. Actually, I was a Java developer back then, and actually one day I met my other co-founder, Radovan Semanchik, who was already several years into identity management back then. And actually, but it took several years to actually transform myself from a Java developer into identity developer. And actually, the situation that changed that was actually economic downturn in 2008. And when we were looking for new opportunities for to make the living, we had a lot of free time. So we experimented with a lot of technologies and products go to market. But finally, we settled with midpoint, and actually we founded Evolveum around midpoint in 2011.
So for people who aren't familiar with Evolveum and the midpoint product that you guys have, this is an open source identity and access management technology. Can you give us sort of like the 30-second to maybe 1 minute elevator ride, pitch? We don't want to turn it into a commercial, but we'll talk about it. But for those who aren't familiar, introduce us to Evolveum.
Yeah, actually, we started as a technology company and as a pure open source company, and we are still pure open source still today. Actually, we are open source is our mission. It's not only about the open code. It's also we are opening all the ideas, all the documentation, knowledge base. We help publish a book to the public. We are publishing also the methodologies to the public, and also all the integration connectors code and so on. So we are true open source believers. Actually, I would say we are also leader in open source IGA because if you are watching the market guide from Gartner or Kupinger, there are no other open source components there or no other products there. So we are proud that we are a leader in open source IGA. I would say also we are building Midpoint as a platform to enable other solutions to grow on top of Midpoint. It's these days it's a lot of our partners are building cloud solution on top of Midpoint for different market segments. Actually, we are focusing on the Midpoint itself, the product and the platform, and we have built a partnership network on top of that, where we are covering 45 different countries with our partners, where actually partners are those that are doing the sales and actually delivering the implementation projects.
Thanks for that background, Igor. So I want to start the conversation around IGA at a very simplistic level. And I'm going to bounce to Jeff because I want to hear what his definition of this is as well. But in your words, how would you define IGA, Identity Governance and Administration?
Yeah, actually, personally, I think it's a very challenging question. But in general, actually, you are looking for answers, actually, who has access where and why. And you have different processes, a bunch of processes around that to actually get those answers. Basically, you are managing and governing, managing identities and governing the organization. And this is how I see that. And actually, I have to talk to the organizations to actually get better idea who is looking for what specifically in this IGA space.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like from your perspective, you're saying, well, it's less how I define IGA, more how my clients define IGA. Jeff, I'm wondering, same question to you. How do you define IGA?
Yeah, I mean, I think you cover some of the use cases. I think about it from user lifecycle management, basically, and the audit stuff that goes behind it. Do you know who has access to what, and can you prove it? And is that access appropriate? I think those are some of the main things. I think it's one of those glue technologies that sits behind the scenes, and if it's working the way it's intended, it's almost invisible, other than just maybe a front end interface that is providing a window into, oh, here's Jim. Or here's Igor, and they have these different types of access, and here's all the receipts that we've kept indicating that is actually appropriate. and was approved and those sorts of things.
So I'm going to give my 2 cents here. I think of IGA kind of like I think of IAM. We refer to IAM as if it's one thing, and I kind of always came from the perspective that it was 2 things: identity management, like IDM, and access management, AM. So it got kind of shortened into one space: identity and access management. To me, identity governance and administration, or actually, I think at one point they were calling the space IAG, identity administration and governance. The idea is identity administration and identity governance. So I think the IDM, identity management, is really the identity administration. The idea that you have this group of users that you centrally manage, you give them access, and then you provision that out to applications. Then came along this identity governance space where the idea was, well, now we want to know who has access to what. Not only did we provision out, but what actually exists. We pull all that together, correlate it to a single identity, and now whoever's interested in knowing what access a person has one place to go to know who has access to what. So to me, that's the identity governance. But organizations need both. They need that centralized control. To me, that's the identity administration side. So what I found, I think, with the IGA becoming so popular is that most organizations are doing some level of IGA now. So the question that I wanted to ask you, Igor, is that the IGA market has so many companies that are delivering IGA solutions, large enterprises, small enterprises, different industry focuses. Are there still populations of organizations that are underserved?
Yeah, I would say definitely. Actually, this is one of the reasons we are here even after 10 years of actually existence, and we are actually growing. And I must say we are bootstrap company, so actually we have to make the living out of the actually of our product. Otherwise, we won't be here anymore. So we have definitely identified there are some market segments. Some of them are niche segments and also communities that are underserved. So I would say the obvious community is actually those that are looking for open source solutions. So actually, if someone type into Google open source identity governance or identity management, actually we are on the first page. So that's actually great for us. Then there is a bunch of companies that are not looking explicitly into open source, but actually for the benefits that actually they would like to download, try and play with the product before they adopt it, before they prepare the story and the message for the leadership in their company to actually move forward with the project. There are other underserved verticals like small to medium enterprises. And there is also a very specific group of very small companies that are operating in a regulated environment. So there are also underserved companies, I would say today, because everyone is going for cloud solutions. So we are also focusing on those customers that I would like to stay either on premise or in the infrastructure as a service solution, and would like to operate the IGA that way. Actually, we are not leaving the cloud customers behind, because our partnership network is building the cloud solution for different segments, niche segments, or geographical locations to actually serve those needs. So I would say pretty much still a lot of customers that actually are looking for our solution, and actually we are actively working with those customers. They are helping us to build a product, and actually thanks to that we can expand to adjacent markets as well. So thanks to that we are growing.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you mentioned the small to mid-sized enterprises, Jeff. I mean, that's usually when we work with larger enterprises and they are looking at IGA, it's usually to replace some system. Whereas a lot of times with small to mid-sized, especially smaller or entry into midsize, they're replacing paper processes, So that's what I see a lot. I kind of feel like the big holdup is either that, well, they just have finally gotten to the point where it's like, all right, we're at this breaking point. We need automation. Or it's, what's held them back is really cost. I mean, IGA solutions can be pretty expensive. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it, right? I think there's that natural inflection point where it's like, okay, we're done taking faxes and we're going to start, doing things from an automation standpoint. Do you build it? Do you buy it? And if you build it, what are you building it on? Is it going to be something that's already sort of pre-existing, open source sort of solution, sort of like, what Igor and the Evolveum team bring to the table? Or what I think tends to happen more often is, some developer goes off and builds some, crazy system on their own. And now it becomes like, hey, you just built an IGA platform of your own, and there was already products out there or things like that because you were trying to save money or whatever it may be. And the next thing you know, it's 10 years later, and this solution that was designed to be like a 6-month stopgap has now, become so ingrained that it's very difficult to remove from the enterprise or upgrade or maintain or anything like that. So
yeah, we were working with a client, and they had a system, and this was a big client called the Merge. Remember the Merge?
Yeah, I know we're going to get to kind of like, I think education, right, probably makes a lot of sense. I'm going to probably talk about that as part of the conversation. But I'm even thinking of, there's one client I had way back in the day that basically built an IGA platform on the mainframe. And this was a full featured system. Like it was, SailPoint before SailPoint, like 20 years ago, right? That sort of, platform. So, and they were really struggling with how do we move off of this? We don't have as many people who are, trained up on the mainframe. Those folks are starting to retire, and it's just kind of like the COBOL, people. They were left behind, and then now all of a sudden they're in hot demand again because no one else, knows their stuff.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the way a lot of commercial software gets built is that somebody has a small consulting firm, they build a system for a client, and then they say, "Oh, now we know how to build a system for managing and governing identities. Let's turn it into a commercial product." I don't have any proof of that except what I've observed, but back onto this IGA topic, one of the things that I don't know, I've kind of struggled with is that Gartner, I think, considers IGA as mature to the point where they no longer publish the Magic Quadrant. And I struggle with that because I see a lot of stuff happening, but let's just take for granted that it is a space that's reached a certain level of maturity. My question to Igor is, how do you innovate in a space that's reached that level of maturity?
Although market is matured, that what we are feeling that actually adoption lags behind. So there is still a lot of opportunity for actually adoption and actually deployment of IGA solutions. And actually, there are many studies that are actually out there from big corporations or independent organizations that actually are mentioning even the companies are struggling even with basic processes for IGA. So actually, and for us, it seems that actually the common problem for every organization is data are not clean enough to actually to deploy the solution. I mean, the data and digital identities are not clean enough to actually start adopting a product or a solution, deploying a solution. So actually, this is one of our focus where we see that innovation will happen, that actually we need to deploy the product in any environment, start working with that environment, maybe start marking the identities to actually do not touch those for some time. And actually, if them identity is marked as clean, then you can start working with identities and this kind of stuff. So we see a lot of innovation will happen on the data side. In this case, it's identities.
Yeah. I think innovation can come in many different ways. I think faster time to value is certainly one. I think things like how do you get to the point of having cleaner data? I mean, that you start getting value right away from that. So That might be a transition to my next question, which is really, what are some of the biggest problems that organizations face, that in your experience, what is the biggest problem that they face in IGA?
We are strong believers that we have to do something about the identities, the quality of the data, not to have actually garbage in, garbage out. And actually, we are moving our actually product to actually would be very effective to actually start working with any identity data we will get in a real environment. And actually, especially, we have to be very smart and effective about that, because we are open source, and we have to bring the value to the customers as soon as possible to get the subscription, because we are rolling out of the subscription, and we have very strong motivation that our customers will be successful as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think garbage in, garbage out is that's been the same problem for the past 20 years. So I can't even add much to that. Last question in this area of IGA, which is around something we've had some guests speak on the podcast about, which is this idea of convergence. The idea that IGA, access management, privilege access management, cloud infrastructure, entitlement management are kind of converge into a single platform. Not sure if you agree with that or not. My question to you is, what does the IGA market look like in, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road?
Yeah, actually, I partially agree with that. Some solution will actually merge into one big offering, but actually, for example, for SSOs and access management, we see there are so many products out there, and every organization is using something different. So we rather see that actually it's a complementary product to IGA, and we see that there will be integration. So we prepare interfaces for this kind of integration, and thanks to open source, we are able to have the documentation how to integrate different SSOs with midpoint. So it's working great for us. Then for the convergence for cloud, I'm not sure what will happen in next couple of years, because there are also strong movements that some organizations are moving out of the cloud back to the on-premise infrastructure. So we will see what will happen in the coming years. And there is another movement, I would say. We see that thanks to AI breakthrough and chat GPT, actually this is working very well for us, because we are keeping all the knowledge out there for free in the public domain, and one can train even the chat GPT model to actually on our data, and actually this model can answer and help engineers and developers to actually to deploy midpoint much faster. And I would say that some innovation will happen there. In the beginning, it will help you to actually you don't have to Google to go for some simple answers, but you will ask ChatGPT. But as the AI will train more, then I can imagine that if you would like to connect some system that is not so common, it will extract the protocols from it will extract the schema from the system. It will take the inspiration from the existing connectors code, which we have actually tens of connectors out there that are in the open source domain. And actually it will propose you, or code will be your pair programmer to develop a new connector with you. And actually it will speed out of effort, and especially it will help you with boilerplate configuration for any open source solution, and actually help you even to write the integration code. So that's actually great, and it's working great for us. And yeah, I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the recent advancements with the natural language processing and the AI, right? ChatGPT, Lambda, things like that. I'm excited by it. I'm a little disappointed that my idea for a chatbot like 10 years ago as like a front end for an IGA platform was something that I just never pursued, because I can certainly see the option now. I was like, you're totally right. I was like, in a decade, 2 decades, whatever it might be, people probably won't be writing code. They will be asking AI to do something for them. And behind the scenes, the magic is, taking the intent of the request, factoring together, what that package looks like, and then delivering, here's what your integrator looks like, right? Hey, we need an integrator for, I don't know, IMIS and Okta to be able to do some sort of, chapter management for nonprofit. Sort of exists today, but not really. Like, here, let's cobble something together. I think having that as a functionality is cool, and will certainly, I think, accelerate deployment methodologies and things like that. When it comes to the open source side of the world, though, we're dealing with models in the AI space that are not necessarily open source, right? They're the property of certain organizations. I guess, how do you balance that open source sort of mentality versus, maybe what might be proprietary, AI models or other parts of the product?
Yeah, actually, there are some generic AIs that actually will help you to configure the midpoint, for example, or actually write some boilerplate code. But actually, there is still a space for innovation to build AI inside the product. Like, for example, I cannot imagine ChatGPT will help you to actually with role mining for your organization. So it's so specific problem that you will still need to have some kind of statistical model or AI machine learning to actually help with that. There are also other ways, like, for example, if you have a bunch of attributes that you call accounts or identities and need to correlate those. Actually, this is a specific problem that actually you need some kind of recommender system with feedback loop and build into the product, where you actually need that to actually improve over the time to actually speed up the correlation and clean up your data. And there are also some other ways where you can improve and have a product specific AI. Actually, we are working and experimenting with these kind of statistical models already. And yeah, we see that there will be benefits for the clients as well here.
So you got me on the sidetrack about the AI. I joke, we've been calling this AI at the center for the last few weeks because it keeps coming up. But I think it's just where we're at from hey, as of, February and March 2023, this is just what's happens to be in those kind of the zeitgeist. I want to pivot back to the open source question, because I think this is something that's relatively unique, right? Especially in the IGA space, is having an open source IGA product. I guess, how do you define what open source means? And I guess, what makes the software open source? Is it the software itself? Is it the documentation? Is it the openness of the coding to allow people to pick it apart and take the parts that they want? How do you define it?
It actually depends who you are. Actually, for some kind of developer or engineers, it's open code and open principle, like documentation or methodologies. Knowledge base is very important. But for some others, the openness in that is in the way that actually you can try it, download it, configure it yourself, and actually move forward when you are ready. For some, there is this typical openness in, so that actually it's increasing innovation or security. But actually, I have to agree with the increased security. Like, for example, there is GitHub that is scanning the source code, the repositories, actually the dependencies and so on, and actually helping you to actually avoid security issues before something bad happens. Like, if you are using some library that it's already identified there is some security problem, you can upgrade, and you don't even have to look into the code. So that's actually great. We see it's actually happening, and thanks to many open source solutions, even GitHub, it's improving very well in this open domain. And I would say, actually, a very important part of open source is also community. It's actually can be different cohorts that are strengthening, that the ideas are flowing, and actually there is a collaboration. So I would say community is crucial part of the open source.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the strength, right? Is you have multiple people looking at it, and picking it apart, make sure that it's the strongest product possible and is, as clean as possible too, from like a coding perspective. I think there is also, and I think this is a misconception, is that open source is free. Jim is famous. I don't know who said it originally, but I'll attribute it to Jim as free isn't a puppy. There is a lot of care and feeding that sort of, goes along with it from a support perspective, or maybe, other components. I guess, what's your perspective on, is open source free? And I guess what's free and what's not free when people are thinking about, hey, yeah, maybe open source is the way we want to go because we think we'll save money, or, maybe what their assumptions really aren't what the way they should be thinking about it. How do you portray that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, I would say open source was never free. And open source has gone a long ways. Actually, in the early days, a lot of people helped pay by their health for maintaining the open source, but it has changed over the last decade. And I would say open source has just different structure of expenses. So sometimes you are saving some effort or money or whatever, but actually the expense is always there. Someone has to pay the salaries, pay for the time of the people. And I would say our story also, we have decided that you can do whatever you want with our product, but actually the breaking point is when actually you would like to work with us, spend our time, then actually there is a strong boundary that actually you have to pay for the services in form of subscriptions.
Mm-hmm. What type of organization typically does the best with open source? Because I think, Jim, you and I kind of hit it earlier, is the education space seems to be pretty big on open source. We see things like Grouper and Shibboleth and sort of things like that's out there as well that are very unique to those spaces. And I think there's a natural tendency to shift towards that when it comes to those sorts of institutions. Do you agree with that? Are there other, organization types or industries or verticals that tend to see better success with an open source approach versus something that's maybe more commercial based?
Actually, I mentioned already some market segments where actually open source is much more successful. And I would add also there are very large organizations that are having very unique needs. And actually, one of the benefits to actually go for open source is also a possibility to influence the roadmap. And actually, that way, it's working. The product is working for this very large organization as they need. And there is another benefit for very large identity sets. The open source product is scaling much better from economical point of view. So there's another benefit for them. And I would say these days, when we were starting Evolveum, we have seen a lot of struggles even in the purchasing departments, how to actually buy the open source and so on. Actually, but during the COVID, actually, I don't know what happened, but the adoption of open source improved a lot. That actually there are not these questions that were before. And actually, if organization is the open source solution is working for the organization, they just find a way how to actually purchase the subscription. So it's improving.
That's interesting that you felt like it sounds to me like you saw an uptick in the open source world when COVID hit. I wonder if that was because more people had time to spend at home, kind of learning it, or I guess, what do you attribute that to other than, it was just the right place, right time?
I don't think it's COVID related. It's just when we realized that actually it's happening even in the IGA space. And actually, I would say it's not only about IGA. Actually, it's age of open source, I would say. So that there are also some studies that where you can find that actually solutions and products built on open source are actually progressing and scaling very well.
Igor, I wanted to just go back to one thing that you stated, that you see some organizations moving back away from the cloud. I think the overall trend that I'm seeing anyway is the opposite, but I'm wondering what are you seeing that is making you say, some organizations are actually backing away from, and I'm not sure if you meant like cloud as in software as a service or infrastructure as a service or a bit of both.
Actually, what I'm seeing is actually infrastructure as a service. It's for some organization, it's too expensive to operate in this environment. And actually, when you back up from infrastructure as a service, then maybe you will back up also from software as a service. So we will see. Actually, maybe that will be a trend, maybe not. But actually, it's not so important for us. We still have actually other segments where we can grow, and actually, we are happy.
So, Igor, you've been really generous with your time. I want to start to get things wrapped up. I think you're the first guest that we've had on from Slovakia. So, first of all, thank you for taking time in your day or maybe in your evening at this point, to be part of this. I had a question around, and people know me, I like to eat, and we like to talk about food on this. And I wanted to ask about the Slovakian, I don't know if it's a dish or meal, and you'll help me with this, and please forgive my pronunciation, but Brinzové haušky. Can you explain what that is and educate Jim and myself and others?
Yeah, actually, Brinzové haušky is a very national dish in Slovakia, and basically, it's very traditional meal that is made out of potatoes. Like actually, you are eating very small gnocchis with a cheap cheese, but this cheap cheese is called brinza, and it's very special. It's very soft. And actually, you are drinking that with gincica, very traditional drink, also very specific.
And that gincica is made from, I think, sheep's milk as well. So it's kind of like, I think the idea is nothing goes to waste as sort of part of this dish, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So is it, one thing wasn't clear to me is that alcoholic? Is it fermented? Is there things added to it? Or is it more of a milk-based type, non-alcoholic beverage?
Yeah, it's non-alcoholic beverage.
Well,
not at all.
Oh well, nothing's perfect. So you mentioned
actually you can eat the Brinzové haušky with bacon. It's very the taste is.
I was
going
to ask because I think you mentioned like the gnocchi. I've heard like onions. I've heard chives. I've heard bacon. Obviously the cheese itself. And what I might hear something as like a national dish, I guess. Is it popular with locals, or is this something that's like, it's a national dish, but locals really don't eat it? I guess, how popular is it, to actually eat it as a Slovakian?
Yeah, either you love it or hate it. Actually, I love it, so I'm eating that pretty often.
Okay. Jim, you're in Augusta, Georgia. Any native, I guess, dishes to your area of the woods?
Yeah, so they have something in the South, and I don't know if it's native to Augusta, called pimento cheese. I've never tried it, so I don't want to criticize it too much, but it doesn't look like something I'd like to eat. Of course, we have like soul food and lots of fried chicken. I think that's common across the South. But one thing, because I'm in Augusta, home of the Masters Golf Tournament, something that's famous that they do at the Augusta National, the home of the Masters, is they still sell sandwiches for $1, and those are egg salad sandwiches. Another food, like, to me, that just eggs, I don't think make good sandwiches. But that's just me, man. I mean, when I was over in Holland for a while, they put eggs on sandwiches, like hard-boiled eggs, which is only one step from egg salad, right? It's just missing the mayonnaise. But I don't know. It's just not the kind of dish that strikes me as something I'd like. So I haven't tried them yet.
A $1 egg salad sandwich in the middle of Georgia heat does not sound to me like a very refreshing.
Well, here's the thing. It must be a money loser because, I mean, they're not going to, they get
the cost
thousands.
Of eggs.
Thousands. Yeah, right. Exactly. They get thousands of dollars for, people coming to the event. And, it's more or less what Augusta or what the Masters is all about is tradition. And so at some point they started the tradition of $1 egg salad sandwiches. And I'm sure it became a money loser, but they kept doing it anyway. So that aspect I find pretty cool. I just wish it was something that, I'd want to eat.
Well, you mentioned pimento cheese. That's definitely something in the South. As a recent North Carolina transplant, I see it everywhere. I do not care for it. So I'm not on that bandwagon at all. Having lived in the Chicago area for, 40 years or so, it's pizza, it's hot dogs, Chicago style, it's bratwurst, Polish sausage, kind of things like that.
I think of North Carolina, I think of barbecue, man. Like pulled pork.
I haven't found a really good barbecue place yet. We've had this conversation. I'm a little bit disappointed with the barbecue that I've so far experienced, generally speaking, in North Carolina. There was that one spot outside of Charlotte I mentioned, but I found better barbecue in Chicago. So I'm going to throw the gauntlet down. If you've got a recommendation for Asheville, North Carolina area for barbecue, hit me up because I am on the hunt.
Someone else will have to hit you up on that. But I lived in the Charlotte area for about 8 years. And in Mooresville, which is the headquarters of NASCAR, there was a barbecue place there. It was just fantastic. I would go there, every week, every other week. And pulled pork sandwiches were always on my order.
Well, it's so versatile, right? You've got pork, you've got beef, you've got chicken. I mean, you could eat barbecue every day of the week and not have the same dish.
That's right. And coleslaw. Do you like coleslaw?
Nope. My wife does. I hate it.
So in North Carolina, they have like this yellow coleslaw. I think they put mustard in it. I think maybe it's egg yolks.
That doesn't make it better. That makes it worse.
It makes it really much better. It's wonderful. And they put sugar in it too.
Oh, see, now it's just getting stupid and crazy. Igor, do you have any thoughts on barbecue?
Actually, my brother is doing great barbecue. So if you visit Slovakia one day, so just give me a call and we can have a barbecue together.
All right, now we're going to take the podcast on the road. I think that would be very cool. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for this week. Igor, thank you so much for spending time with us. Really appreciate you taking time out of the day. Jim, for yourself as well. Always appreciate it. We always have good conversations. You can visit us, the show itself, online. We're at idacpodcast.com. We're on Twitter at idacpodcast. I'll have some links in the show notes as well so that people can check out and connect with Igor on LinkedIn. You can check out Evolveum, which is EVOLVEUM.com. So you can learn more about what they're doing, in the open source world, especially with the Midpoint product and the IGA side of things. And I forgot to mention, we are also on Mastodon at IDAC Podcast at infosec.exchange. And, hopefully we'll have some friendly faces at the Gartner Summit here in a week or so. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And we'll go ahead and leave it there and talk with everyone in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com and find us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. See you next time on Identity at the Center.